Right. Well, hello, students. Welcome to Chapter 5 in Market-Based Management. We're going to be talking about and studying market segmentation and market segmentation strategies. And one of the examples that I typically give when I talk about market segmentation is when we think about cars and all of the different cars that someone can buy. And what's interesting is, of course, over 100 years ago, Henry Ford has famously quoted with a customer can have any type of car they want as long as it's black. And of course, the irony of that statement by Henry Ford was that he only made one kind of car. And excuse me, when there is a producer of products or services that is a monopoly, or monopolist has monopolistic power, that it is able to dictate to the market what types of products and types of services are offered. But of course, we recognize over 100 years later that that is not the case. There are dozens of different kinds of car brands. There's electric and uh, gasoline powered combustion engine. There are different sizes of cars, different colors of cars, and so on. And we might ask ourselves, well, why is that? And it is simply because people have different preferences and needs and wants and desires. And therefore, car companies over the last 10 plus decades have figured out that if they develop different kinds of cars with different features and benefits, that they will be in the aggregate more successful than if they would simply offer one type of car and hope that everyone could sort of um, prefer that one car. And we know that certainly in a market capitalistic society and economy, that does not happen. And so, with that, that's just a great starting point for us to think about this notion of market segmentation uh, and the market strategies that can result from market segmentation. In particular, with this chapter in market based management, we're going to focus on a type of market segmentation, which is needs based market segmentation. And there are many different types of segmentation. Certainly, one of the most uh, common is needs based market segmentation, but within that, there can also be usage based market segmentation. Um, there can be psychographic, different personality trait market segmentation, firmographic market segmentation at the business to business level, and so on. But for the purposes of this chapter, we are going to focus exclusively on needs based market segmentation. So let's consider the age group called millennials. Um, you can see that uh, now these slides are a little bit older, but when they were developed, millennials were sort of the newest and youngest age group, age demographic, age segment. And at the time, it was defined by people that were at that time ages 18 to 24. Now in 2025, students, people that are in that age group are called Gen Z. Um, and so some of you may be part of Generation Z. And so sociologists started naming these different demographic groups several decades ago. Um, in my case, I am part of the Gen X generation here, and if you were born in the 60s and 70s, you would have been in Gen X. Of course, my parents' age, born in the 40s and 50s, were in early 60s, were part of the boomers, baby boomers generation, and so on. So, and hopefully you've heard of those different types of age groups. But we're going to consider, at least for the purposes of this, millennials as a segment. We could also maybe think about it in Gen Z um, in 2025, simply the youngest generation among us at that given point in time. So we recognize that people that are younger, they want and need and prefer different things than people that are older. And you can think about maybe your parents or your grandparents. One great example of needs-based segmentation is around how do people consume their news. So, for example, your parents or your grandparents might still get a physical newspaper, and it shows up every morning on their driveway, and they walk out and get it, and they read that with a cup of coffee every morning. Okay, that might be more of a baby boomer, maybe a Gen X, but I would say at this point in 2025, that would be a baby boomer generation, as opposed to a millennial generation or a Gen Z generation. Probably it would be rare that someone in that segment would get a regular newspaper. They would more than likely, and you can probably yourself think about this. Well, how do you consume news? It may be through social media, LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter or X. It might be um, uh, well, Facebook, but social media, as opposed to we are talking about Gen X or Boomers, might be uh, not so much social media, but more around network news, cable news, newspapers, and so on. And so as producers of goods and services, we want to customize our product and service offerings based upon, in this case, the different needs segments that present themselves or that exist. So here you can see, for example, companies like Procter and Gamble, who are consumer packaged goods, probably one of the biggest in the world. Target, I think everyone is pretty familiar with Target as a retailer. Grape Nuts, that's a cereal brand that generally older people will eat. I'm not sure Gen Y would necessarily eat a lot of that, but you can sort of appreciate that if you are younger, your bathing products and quote unquote beauty products are going to be different than someone that's older. Same thing around retail stores. Um, you know, Retail stores have sort of a vibe. You could look at a Target versus a Walmart. Target feels like it's maybe more of a younger kind of vibe. Um, Certainly in clothing, we can think about older brands versus brands that are focused on younger people. I think about for example, clothing brands like Abercrombie and Fitch versus I don't know, Brooks Brothers. Okay, those are generally different age groups, different looks. Um, Here you can think about here in the lower right some brands that we might think might be more targeted to younger people than not. As I understand it, Facebook is now more for older people. Um, Red Bull, that feels like a younger brand kind of focus. Apple used to be exclusively younger, but I think that is certainly changing. Scion, Cars, Converse, actually, those are seem to be popular with younger people again. Um, uh, and I'm trying to remember what the brand was that um, wasn't popular, and now it is again. It's escaping me right now. So you sort of get the idea that different brands sort of tend to target different age groups and the preferences associated with each of those age groups. You can think about cars. We were talking about automobiles before. We can think about Toyota and maybe more of a Corolla or um, uh, I was going to say Honda Prius, um, but but there are certainly cars that seem to be focused much more exclusively on for younger people. So if we start to peel this back a bit, we might say, let's look at different needs-based segments. So here's a, customer problem. What kind of siding to put on my home? If you own a home or you grew up in a single family dwelling, you could appreciate that siding might be um, a, a great thing for homeowner to invest in because it would hopefully protect the value of the home. It would save on painting cost. You wouldn't have to paint the house every few years and so on. So within that, we might say segment B here looks like smaller home. Maybe that uh, people that own this house in segment B, maybe they're more focused on siding that is price oriented, or we might say value oriented, as opposed to segment A, looks like a lot bigger house, maybe has more income, um, maybe their interests, what we call psychographics, their activities, interests, opinions, and leisure pursuits, maybe they are more focused on quality as opposed to price. It's sort of a misnomer because it sort of implies that people that are price oriented are not focused on quality, which isn't the case. What I might say differently is that maybe segment B is value oriented, and then segment A is uh, uh, luxury oriented, something like that. And so we might say, well, those are sort of euphemisms for people that are in segment A, they have more money or they're willing to spend more money versus segment B, they're willing to spend less money. So this is a pretty typical way that we would think about needs-based segmentation. Another way for us to think about needs-based segmentation would be around PCs or laptops. And so we could see, for example, I won't walk through all of these different elements, but attributes that people have different needs, wants, and desires around a computer or PC, uh, or an iPad or and so on. And so we might say, well, Well, what would be the differentiators? Well, maybe price is more of a dominant issue, and so I'm willing to have slower speed, less memory, smaller hard drive, more basic operating system, and so on, as opposed to someone who is less price sensitive, a segment that is less price sensitive, and so they want more benefits. They want um, they're willing to pay more. They want more memory, more hard drive space. They want more speed. Um, they want sort of all the bells and whistles around an operating system. They want a longer warranty and so on. And again, these are decisions that all of you or many of you have probably made in your lifetime already. And again, it's differentiating between people that are more price oriented or maybe because their age or what have you, they don't have as much disposable income and therefore they're going to be more focused on lower or cheaper, lower price products and services versus someone who maybe is older, maybe they have more disposable income and so on. So when we think about consumers, and we're speaking specifically about the difference between consumers, individual decision makers versus businesses, that um, you know, what are sort of the drivers of these differences and preferences across different consumer uh, segments? And so certainly we can think about demographic segmentation or demographic attributes. These are the ones that we think are pretty obvious. We can look at someone and, in general, sort of guess their age, and we could sort of guess their income or marital status or education level or what kind of profession or occupation they have. Those are what we would call obvious market segmentation attributes. So now there are, we could consider these lifestyle types of attributes. So maybe it's different attitudes around you're more, a person is more risk seeking versus not risk seeking. Um, are your values more, um, traditional versus progressive, we might say activities. I think about, for example, people that tend to live out on the West Coast, they may, or in the Rocky Mountains, they're more focused on hiking and biking and canoeing. And so that might be more of an outdoor active lifestyle as opposed to someone who lives in downtown Chicago or New York City, where their activities are maybe much less outdoor activities. Maybe it's you know going to Broadway shows and shopping in the city and going to really cool different restaurants, taking in art exhibits at the museum and so on. And then, of course, we can think about different interests and political views. So we have demographic segmentation attributes, we have lifestyle segmentation attributes, and then finally, usage-based um, segmentation attributes. And we mentioned this right sort of at the top of this lecture. And usage-based might be something like, well, how much of a particular product or service does a particular market segment use? Are you a light user or heavy user? Maybe the time of use, it could be maybe seasonal. So, um, you know, uh, for example, it's spring right now in Kentucky, and so I have been buying grass seed to fill in some of the areas in my front yard, and so I'm not going to be doing that so much in the fall and winter, but during the spring, I'm going to be buying some of those grass seeds. Personal usage, maybe again is a different preference. I'm thinking, for example, maybe an electric toothbrush versus not. That might be sort of a personal choice. Um, Frequency of use. Do I use the product? Maybe I uh, purchase it frequently, but not in a great quantity. So I might say, for example, chewing gum. I may not buy a lot at any one point in time, but as I'm checking out at the grocery store, I might, maybe one out of every three times I'm checking out, um, I will pick up a pack of chewing gum, for example. So what's interesting, and I want you to, as we sort of back up and look at this in totality. We have one, two, three, four, five. So 5 times 3 is 15. Now we can start to appreciate sort of the mathematical impact of all of these different market segments. So we could have someone who is younger, who is more progressive, and they are a heavy user of, let's say, I don't think this is Starbucks, but so I could imagine a younger person, maybe more progressive, and they love coffee. Well, they might be a very loyal customer to Starbucks. Okay. As opposed to, you might say, well, someone who is married, maybe more traditional in their values, and they don't really like coffee that much. Maybe they buy, I don't know, Gatorade. And so they like that. And so that would be a different segment. Okay. So you can think about, you know, um, uh, 5 times 3 is 15. We could even have variations or permutations within that. But that just sort of gives you the idea of all of a sudden, when you look at all of these different attributes, market segmentation can become fairly complex. And there are several methodological research tools that we won't really get in too much in this course, but that would help us to be able to identify those different segments. So we were talking about toothbrushes here. We might appreciate toothpaste. So different needs-based segments. We might say, well, maybe one segment from a needs-based standpoint is someone who's a worrier. Maybe they've had a family history of oral, dental problems. And so their primary focus is, hey, I need to prevent tooth decay. So that could be one segment. And you can see here if I am Crest or Aquafresh or um, Colgate. I don't know if that's still a brand or not, but all the different brands of toothpaste, you can sort of see here. I'm sure these are pretty much just rough estimates, but here this research would say about 1 in 2 purchasers of toothpaste are trying to prevent cavities and um, uh, dental issues, as opposed to 3 in 10 are focused on, of course, they want to prevent decay, but they want to make sure their teeth are really white. I don't know if hers are really white. I don't know if mine are really white, but that could be right a big segmentation. I'm concerned about decay, but I'm more focused if I'm a worrier on hygiene, then I want to make sure my teeth are super white. Now, we might have, again, across the board, everybody's concerned about preventing oral decay, but we have some who are focused on what is the taste of the flavor. We can imagine, when we're younger, maybe we're a little more sensitive to, I've got to have my toothpaste be mint and not some weird flavor. I don't know what that would be. So that could be another segment, right? And then value here, you can see private label. So Um, maybe that's Rite Aid brand or Walmart brand. Um, and, these people are certainly focused on prevention of decay, but they're not worried about the brand. That's not really a driving factor for them. So, again, I want you to note in the aggregate 50 plus 30 is 80, 95, 100 here. So we can sort of appreciate four different market segments broken down by different percentages. What were the key demographics, lifestyle, price, product size, large canisters? That's interesting. I don't know how that works. Maybe you buy 5 tubes of toothpaste at once. You never want to run out. Uh, and then, here they have some sample brands that that we might think about. All right. Now let's switch. We're going to talk about uh, business to business or businesses versus consumers. So again, if we think about uh, market segments, consumers, households, decision household, uh, uh, parents, individual households, they have different needs, wants, and desires versus businesses. And so we can think about businesses that we have worked for or were familiar with, and similar to consumers, individual consumers, households, businesses can be segmented based upon different attributes. Okay, so individuals, we looked at demographics. Here we would say firm demographics, or another word, firmographics. And so, what would those firmographic attributes be? Well, how large is the company? How many employees? How much do they sell? Do they have one location or 1,000? How long have they been in business? Financial situation, are they an industry leader, very solid financially, or they're sort of on the edge. Are they going to survive, the next recession kind of stuff? So those again are pretty obvious. We can find out about most businesses, certainly publicly traded businesses, those that sell shares of their company on a major stock exchange. Those attributes are fairly easy to identify. Now, what is a little bit more difficult to identify is company culture. So I can think about, for example, a company I worked for 20 years was a spinoff of IBM, International Business Machines. That was sort of like the company to work for in the, I would say mid 20th century, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s. Um, Very conservative culture. Um, yeah, I think that'd probably be the best way to say it. As opposed to now, when we think about when we see images of a younger quote unquote company like Apple or Google, we might see foosball or ping pong tables in the office. People are wearing jeans and t-shirts, as opposed to IBM, which I was referring to before. That was suit and tie, blue suit, blue pinstripe suit, maybe three-piece blue pinstripe suit with a tie, very formal kind of dress, um, versus sort of a younger feel where now, I mean, really, most companies, I don't think really that I'm aware of wear suits every day to work. So that has certainly changed. But sort of the look and feel of a company that can vary in terms of, you can see here, attributes around sophistication, growth orientation. Do you want to be the first in everything or not? Um, what is your disposition as a company toward technology, or Are you a technology leader versus more of a technology follower? Are you more decentralized in your decision making, or is the company more centralized where all major decisions are made by the CEO, something like that. So we've got firmographics, we have corporate culture, company culture, and then usage behavior. So this one is a little bit easier to think about and a little bit easier to identify than culture. So we might think about different applications. So um, uh, I came from the printing manufacturing industry I mentioned in a prior lecture. And so for some companies, printing is not really that important. I'm thinking about, for example, like a florist. They probably have to, of course, print out receipts when someone buys something. They could have a physical piece of paper to take with them to uh, document the transaction, as opposed to historically, we can think about retail pharmacies. So, retail pharmacies, I'm sure most, if not all of you, are familiar with the fact that when you buy a pharmaceutical product from a pharmacy, that there is a label on that. And so all of those labels are printed, and therefore printing in retail pharmacy is very important and is a very different application than it would be, let's say, at a florist, for example. Um, Lots of different things that we can think about around businesses and the way that they use different types of products or services, how much they buy, when do they buy it, how often do they buy it, and who are the primary users. So, in terms of printing, for example, I can think about in retail banking, printing of documents. You make a deposit at a bank. If you go to the physical bank, you are probably someone that they used to call them tellers, but basically people that are behind the counter, that they are the ones that are primarily interacting with printers in that environment versus, let's say, a corporate VP in sort of the central office of a bank. They're probably not going to be interacting much with the printer, certainly not for receipts of a deposit slip, receipt, so on. So so again, we can think about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times 3 is 15. We can, appreciate that there would be, at least in this case, a minimum of 15 different possible segments, and it could be many more than that, right? So again, that this becomes sort of a mathematical uh, question when we think about it at that level. We might, similar to individuals where we saw price versus quote unquote quality, we might think about in small businesses, maybe, we've got growth oriented entrepreneurs. They are going to be looking for different types of products and services generally than those companies that are more cost focused. Um, uh, just throwing this out there as something to look at. Additionally, an academic from Harvard several years ago, almost 40 years ago, wrote a book called Competitive Strategy, and he talks about that certainly any company can compete being the low cost provider. So we can think about um, Harbor Freight tools, maybe, or Walmart at a retail level versus more, um, you know, uh, uh, maybe upscale quality kind of focused. Let's say around instead of Harbor Freight. Well, I'm trying to think about. Black and Decker. I don't know if that would be necessarily considered a quote unquote high quality product, but it's certainly a brand name product. I think you're going to see uh, fewer of the quote brand, well known household names, brand names in Harbor Freight versus at a Home Depot or a Lowe's, and so on. So, similarly, for businesses, we could have smaller, even larger businesses that are more focused on growth, and and there might even be a age component there, because you can sort of see here younger people kind of think about, more go fast, go lean kind of stuff, as opposed to, okay, a little bit older. Hey, I'm just kind of trying to protect what I've got. I'm going to be more focused on, I'm more of a sustainer as opposed to an entrepreneurial driver. So, pretty simple way for us to think about those different segments. So now we want to say, okay, we sort of understand what different market segments are and how what drives them. Now let's think about how would we build market strategies based upon those different segments. So here we would say here, I don't know that there's necessarily seven different steps, but I, I, I couldn't really disagree with this. So we would, let's say we're going to do a needs-based segmentation. It could be group customers into segments, maybe by demographics. Um, and then for each needs-based segment, let's say millennials versus boomers, determine what are their lifestyles, usage, behaviors, and so on. How attractive is that segment? So, as a producer of products and services, how attractive is a given segment relative to kind of what you do really well as a business? So we might say, for example, um, I'll pause here around segment attractiveness. If I think about airlines, so Delta, United, American, some of the major carriers, um, they're probably going to be more focused on what is attractive for them. Well, business travelers, uh, people that are traveling sort of on the company dime and they have an expense account so they can sit in business class or first class. And so if I am United or Delta or American, I would say, hey, that's a very attractive segment for me. My prices are they're going to be less price sensitive, those customers, and therefore I will be able to make more money from them, segment profitability, because that's sort of what my airline is targeted for. Those, let's say, business travel, as opposed to Southwest Airlines. That segment, business travelers might be much less attractive and less profitable simply because the business traveler, again, has maybe more spending power and therefore they're less price sensitive, as opposed to someone who would select or would be targeted by Southwest. They would it would be more attractive for someone who's an individual who is more price sensitive. Maybe they have more flexibility. They don't have to travel on Monday and Friday. They can leave on a Tuesday and come back, the following Thursday and the next week, and so on. So, that would be one way for us to think about. So we identify the different segments. How attractive are they? How profitable are they? Positioning. So we can think about, how do I want my target audience to think about my product or service? That's this idea of position. So in the decision maker consumer's mind, is this particular product or brand is it is attractive for them than that particular consumer versus someone else. So this notion of how do I want my target audience to think about my brand or product or service relative to other competitive products in the within the landscape. Here, another segment strategy acid test. So can I create a storyboard? So um, I being sort of a marketing nerd. I love sort of analyzing TV ads. I know in the era of streaming ads, you can sort of opt out of those often. But this idea of creating a storyboard, it helps sort of determine, is this really a strategy for this particular market segment that makes sense? Can I build a story that could become a TV, commercial or an ad that someone would look at and they would identify with that, particularly my target audience? So, so for example, I might think about if I'm a Gen Z or millennial and I'm, got a big bonus working for the company I work for, and I want to take a really nice vacation, then I might say, well, I would love to go to an all-inclusive. Maybe I'll go to a sandals or I don't know if these are still around, Club Med. It was basically these luxurious, all-inclusive um, vacation places in somewhere warm like the Caribbean, for example. And so you can start to sort of build a story around. You see a couple, they're younger, newly married, they're on their honeymoon, they're frolicking in the beach and surfing and dancing at night and going to cool clubs and restaurants, and you could sort of build that story, and someone in that target audience would say, huh, that that sort of looks like who I am and what I'm looking for. Um, maybe it's December, and that's when they hand out bonuses, and you got a really nice bonus, and it's like, hey, let's go take a really nice trip for a week and go to an all-inclusive. So, and then based upon steps 1 through 6, then that sort of defines our what we talk about our 4 Ps of marketing: product, price, promotion, and place. So, because of the work that I've done in steps 1 through 6, now I should be able to relatively easily define what is the product, what does it look like, what's that design point, what is the price, what would be the price expectation for that market segment, how would I promote that product if or service. Let's say if it's an all-inclusive and it's targeted to younger people, I might run that on, TikTok or Instagram versus someone who's a Gen X or a boomer. I might run a full page ad in the Wall Street Journal. And that would be using the P of promotion, but in a very different manner across different market segments. Place. How do I buy this? Can I buy it online, or do I have to go to a physical place to buy it? Right. And then are there services associated with it? So sort of staying on the vacation theme, we might say, um, if I'm a younger couple and I want to go to an all-inclusive, maybe I'm a little more price conscious, so I'm gonna sort of I'm gonna shop for my own vacation place, and I'm gonna shop for my own airline, and I'm gonna shop for my own rental car, and so on, as opposed to someone who says, you know what, I just want to hire a travel agent. I'll let them take care of all of it. They'll book my flights, my cars, my excursions, whatever it may be. And so using this process, steps 1 through 7, now I've developed a pretty good idea of how I can go to market for different market segments based upon walking through each one of these 7 steps. So, um, I'm not going to read through all of this. Certainly, at your convenience, you can look through different segments. Here we've got a career woman versus a single parent versus a mature woman. Maybe a core need is growth in professional growth and income, as opposed to mature woman. I don't really know how to define mature women. I'll let well, it looks like they're doing that here. Okay, 35 to 45, 35 to 55, over 55. Um, Parenthetically, I didn't think we were supposed to ask women how old they are, but okay. That's just sort of my poor attempt at humor. Income with minimal risk, mature woman income with minimal risk. They're older, over 55. And so their lifestyle needs, if you're older, at least based upon this segmentation, you're maybe more conservative as opposed to a career woman, more confident, maybe more interested in, active sports, hiking, running, biking, as opposed to uh, I want to ride in a carriage in Charleston and just kind of take me around and I'll see all the cool stuff. So you can sort of get the idea of how you can appreciate different market segments um, within different product or service categories. We talked about attractiveness. We mentioned Michael Porter, certainly microeconomics. We look at these ideas around, for a given market, how big is it? Is it growing? Um, how competitive is it? Number of companies? Is it easy to get into? Are there substitutes for that particular product or service? And then market access. So if we take, for example, luxury all inclusives. We were on that thread. So we might say, well, is that a big market? Second, yeah, it's a big market, a lot of opportunity. Are there a lot of companies? I think so. I mean, it's obviously a lucrative business to be in. It's maybe easier to get into, although you have to have a lot of money to buy, land in a very nice location. So that might restrict the number of people, number of companies that could enter that market. Um, Familiarity. If I'm spending 10, $15,000 on a vacation, I'm really going to want to understand what is the brand and does anybody ever buy that? I think about, for example, river cruises. You might hear about like these Viking river cruises in Europe, where if I'm going to spend again 10 or $15,000 on a cruise, I want to, okay, what's the brand again? Viking versus Joe's Ship Company. Okay, that's going to be a determining factor in in how attractive a particular segment would be. Excuse me. Sorry about that. So, completely different industry. We're looking at health insurance. So, maybe we are excuse me, health insurance or insurance. We have segment one, insurance minimizers. Maybe they're more price sensitive. Basic buyers, maybe they want to have, they want to have life insurance. They're sort of all the way across. They they would have some representation in each of these different situations. um, and over here on the right hand side, do not have and would not add. If you're a premium buyer of insurance, you're very focused on. I probably put myself more in this category, or maybe you think about your parents or grandparents, yes, life insurance for sure, accidental death, hey, prescription drugs, that becomes more important as I get older. Long-term disability. I want to make sure that, as I get older, I might need more healthcare support kind of stuff. And so, again, if I'm, State Farm, or if I am Anthem, Blue Cross Blue Shield, I'm going to view these different market segments, minimizers, basic, and premium, in different ways. And I'm going to create different offerings based upon each one of those different profiles here. Um, I think I think this is often called a snake diagram. So here, it's uh, it's a great visual to be able to say these people, this segment is very different than this segment, very different than this segment. Okay. Um, from a profitability standpoint here, completely different industry. We switch from insurance to, maybe more of silicon sealants here. So how do I go to market? Um, is there an engineering, or excuse me, uh, market application around sealants for electronics versus industry versus construction? And see, what's wonderful, and I love the way Best approaches this, it's the um, sort of monetization of each one of these segments and applications to be able to understand, okay, if I look at, if I'm this company, I'm Silicon Sealants, I'm thinking about 3M, big company that developed post-it notes, right? So they might have these three different applications: electronics, industry, construction. Let's say if I'm 3M, and I say, wow, it looks like my marketing return on investment is 200% here, 167 here in industrial, 186 in construction, for an overall weighted average 183% for marketing ROI across the company. So now I'm able to allocate my marketing and sales resources based upon everything else being equal. I'm going to prioritize investment in electronics first because its ROI is the highest. I'm going to prioritize construction second because its ROI is 186. In industrial, I'm going to prioritize third and 167. So now you can see, with all of these numbers attached to all of the applications, we can begin to sort of determine how am I going to allocate my resources. Um, here, positioning here, we've sort of got this storyboard, right? So we talked about this acid test. Okay. So can I build a story that is credible and believable and compelling based upon the segmentation process? So can I build a story? I don't know what's really going on here. Looks like commercial fishing. I look at DuPont. I'm a commercial fisherman. Looks like I'm at the wharf here. Maybe I'm, a shrimper down in, South Carolina or Georgia off the coast. And I go out at 4 in the morning and I catch shrimp until 8 in the morning. I bring it in, sell it at the market. They put it in the fridge or what have you. So now I've got a whole story around, this boat hull of Kevlar saves fuel, gets there faster, carries more fish, right? So now I've been able to build a story around that market segment, as opposed to aircraft design. Um, Again, it's DuPont, but the application is building aircraft. And so now I build a whole story around, use DuPont's Kevlar in building your plane, right? Your airplane versus your boat. So again, this is sort of the so-called litmus test. Can I build a story that is compelling and deliver that story, whether it's through social media or it's through print ads or TV ads or streaming or what have you. Another example here at the consumer level, this is uh, person A around, let's say, financial management. Maybe this person is more focused on growth, maybe a single professional lady versus maybe a mom with a couple of kids, maybe looking for a little bit more security versus we were talking before about a quote unquote mature woman. So maybe I'm a little bit safer. I'm focused on safety versus capital appreciation and growth. So again, that again is sort of the litmus test or the acid test around can I build a story and how well can I build a story around each one of those segments. Um, Now we can, as I mentioned before, we said, in demographics versus usage versus another consumer segmentation attribute category. We can, say 5 times 5, or excuse me, 5 times 3 is 15. But we might say, well, maybe it's 5 to the third power, right? What is that? 125. So now I can split up all of these segments into these sort of like these subsegments, right? So all of a sudden we go from 15 to 125 different market segments. And so this is why I often talk about that there are, math becomes a very important part of marketing strategy because not only do I have to appreciate all of the different market segments, but then I often also have to be able to articulate the product or sort of the income statement associated with each market segment so that I can begin to prioritize different market segments and how am I going to allocate my resources based upon each one of those subsegments. Okay. This is sort of appreciating, if we think about microeconomics, we might say, James Hardy, I'm not familiar with that, manufacturer of handy plank siding. Okay. Not familiar with that, but um, you might say, well, it looks like, if I look at from using a demand curve from microeconomics, I might say at the mass market level, the market for hardy plank says hardy and handy. Okay, I'm going to go with hardy. I think this is a typo down here. So hardy plank seems to be fairly elastic, right? So the lower the price, the greater the quantity purchased, right? But then Hardy Plank is also appreciating that there is, we could articulate two different segments, right? And we were looking at those two homes uh, several slides ago around, there's one segment that is less price sensitive, more inelastic around price. And, we could call that the quality segment. Okay, as opposed to at the lower end of this demand curve, this kinked demand curve, this segment here is much more price sensitive, and we can see that it is more price elastic versus um, this part of the demand curve, the quality segment versus the price segment. We can go back to cars and Toyota, famous, obviously well-known manufacturer, and we can see over time how they sort of employed this notion of Chris Zook about 20 years ago came up with this idea of market adjacencies. Essentially, the application of that market adjacency says Toyota started with a Corona, that then it vectored off into a Corolla and a Celica, Supra, Camry. That's the one that most people kind of think about. And then they developed these other um, segments in the early 2000s, around or late 20th century, Lexus, Avalon, Prius. And so, what this is saying um, is, as I sort of appreciate all of these different segments, I start to build sort of a roadmap over time around the types of products and services that I'm going to offer over time, based upon being able to uh, essentially capitalize on each one of these subsegments. All right, so we started from basic all the way up to, hey, there's a segment around, I don't mind paying $80,000 for a car versus 50 versus 30, right? So Toyota was able to basically capitalize on each one of these subsegments. Um, Again, looking at different types of market segments relative to cars, all of these I think are related to the combustion engine. We could also, gasoline market, combustion engine. We could, of course, add another larger segment here around hybrid or fully electric. That would be another segment that uh, we could we could identify. Um, we talked about this before with, the numbers start to get pretty big depending upon the type of industry sector in the sectors, or excuse me, in the segmentation strategies we were looking at before. I've got my linear of 5, 10, 15 versus exponential of 5, 25, and 125. This is, obviously in the lower range around 12. And so I can start to sort of articulate all these different types of of market segments. And then if I'm a salesperson and my primary market is number one and number two, I'm going to have a very different sales strategy and marketing approach than maybe these segments seven and eight. So you can see that this idea of market segmentation can be operation or should be operationalized all the way down to um, individual salespeople and the target market segments that individual salespeople are focused on. Again, if we go back to siding here, we were looking at this more price insensitive, this quality segment. Where am I going to focus? Maybe I'm going to focus on custom homes, spec homes, and remodels, as opposed to this price segment where maybe multifamily, like, condominium or townhomes, or uh, manufactured homes or tract homes. I'm not 100% sure what that's about, but basically, you could think about nicer neighborhoods, subdivisions, kind of stuff, as opposed to not terrible neighborhoods, but just much more, modest subdivisions and so on. And then, kind of like we were looking at here before with Toyota and its adjacency strategy, we can start to see that at the lower end here, where the company value, it's the company value of a particular segment is lower, and the customer value is lower. And as we go up into the right here, we're going to employ very different market segment strategies because we are able to sort of tune our marketing and service offerings all the way down to maybe at an individual customer level. Okay. So we talk about mass customization, mass market strategy, all the way up to, hey, hey, Dr. Ross, we've got the car for you. Okay. And I doubt it's obviously just for me, but let's say, and I don't do this by the way, but let's say if I always buy Mercedes, then they probably have my phone number on speed dial. Hey, we just got a new model. and we want to, we're going to have so and so pick you up from your house, and we're going to, take you to lunch. Then we're going to show you the new model and let you take it for a spin. Wow, they've got a market strategy just for me. Well, how are they able to do that? Well, they know in that hypothetical case that I have lots of money to spend and I like sort of that spoiled treatment. And they're able to, as the car dealer, Mercedes dealer, is able to offer that level of service because they recognize that this luxury buyer is willing to pay for that kind of product and service. So, um, again, we've got sort of these storyboards around different ways that we can reach these different customer segments, customer market segments. So, with that, thank you very much. Chapter five, I hope that you are starting to get an idea of the complexity, and I think it's just fascinating around all these different market segments, how segmentation is done, and how we can create different market segments based upon, or excuse me, create different market strategies based upon these different market segments. So have a wonderful day. God bless you.